town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And we decided to do one of our more historical episodes this year for a very special reason. We're continuing the witchy trend after Necropolis.
Of course.
Today we are celebrating a movie that turns 100 this year.
How exciting.
The old witchcraft pseudo-documentary, Häxan.
Which, surprisingly, still looks really good.
Yes, and I have been saying it wrong for as long as I've known about this movie. I've always called it Häxan.
Which confused my husband as well, because I read the little booklet that came with the Criterion version first, and like the first sentence is how to pronounce the movie.
Yes. So it is Häxan, not
It's Häxan.
Häxan. So yeah.
Swedish for witch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who don't know what Häxan is, it is a 1922 fantasy horror pseudo-documentary about the witchcraft hysteria that plagued Eastern Europe from about 1450 to the 1700s.
Yeah, and its connection to modern-day hysteria.
Yes.
And by modern day, I mean 1920s.
1920s hysteria, which...
Specifically women hysteria.
We'll get into that a little bit.
We will, because honestly, women hysteria is one of my favorite diagnoses that you can be prescribed in this modern era and world.
And yeah, because that's when they started really making vibrators, because that was one of the cures.
It was. I do love, though, and we will get into this, the correlations this man jumps to from witchcraft to the modern day woman's trouble.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that he's necessarily wrong, it's just that the examples he picked were
very Freudian.
Very Freudian, and also, like, the witches, supposedly, terrible things. Oh my god, horrible stuff is happening. And then the modern day woman is over here just being like, oh, no, don't mind me, just nicking some jewelry.
Gotta go to an asylum to shower it away.
And in a tepid shower. Oh god, heaven forbid.
Oh, the 1920s.
Oh, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get more into that towards the end.
We'll get there.
But first,
Häxan's written and directed by Benjamin Christensen. It also stars Christensen, Elizabeth Christensen, Oscar Stribolt, and Marine Pedersen.
Yes.
I apologize. I don't know Swedish, so and or
honestly,
Dutch.
And honestly, like, I have a hard time finding anyone saying any of this stuff that's not already Swedish.
Yes, this is an old silent film, so some of the pronunciations are lost on us.
Especially, I don't have a Swedish person to ask, unfortunately.
I do, but he's not very active on social media, so...
Understandable.
Yeah. So when it comes to this era of films, I'm also less knowledgeable about Christensen's other works, as well as the others involved in the action and production of this movie.
Yeah, I love this time period in movies and history, but especially Swedish-wise, this one was new for me. Yeah,
and my only real knowledge of Swedish movies are, what's the... Odin, I think? No, it's not Odin, it's, shit, I'm blanking on the name. I watched it and I really liked it.
Good start.
Fuck, give me a second. A Man Called Ove.
Okay.
Actually a really good movie. It's a very dark comedy.
That matches your style.
Yeah, so is that, and also or Ingmar Bergman. That's pretty much my only Swedish film knowledge. And obviously Häxan.
And now Häxan.
Yeah, so.
Yes.
Also the Phantom Carriage, but
like there's a handful of ones that I know, but all of them are much more recent. 1920s Swedish was beyond me, so all of these people were new for me.
Yeah. And as well, looking through IMDb, I didn't see that most of them did really anything much outside of this movie.
Yeah.
Besides Christensen,
who did quite a few things, but honestly, it's also kind of hard to follow some of these. 1920 times were A, weird, and B, we didn't always necessarily say who was involved in shit.
Yeah.
There's a huge chance that these people are involved in other stuff, and we just don't know.
Yeah, or the films got lost as...
Always a possibility.
Yeah. So this review is going to be a little bit different because while it does have a little bit of a narrative, it's not really like a full-on narrative.
This is one of the most interestingly put together movies I've ever seen.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing, too. So it's a precursory documentary setup.
Yes.
And while it's a little goofy by today's standards, it plays more out like an allegorical textbook, I think is the best way I'd describe it.
With elements of, like, very predecessory found footage style.
Yes.
And so much jumping around that it is purposefully hard to follow what is real and what is fake.
Yeah, and so well done in that regard.
It is wonderfully done.
Yeah, and so before we dive into this, I do want to acknowledge my sources right up from the get-go.
Yes.
One, the director himself in some of the essays he wrote.
Yes.
Bibliotech Diabolique. Which is a 2001 short film by scholar Christian Tyberg, as well as his commentary on the feature film itself. A History of Witchcraft, Sorcery, Heretics, and Pagans by Jeffrey B. Russell and Brooks Alexander, as well as the essays The Unreal by Chris Fujiwara, Let Her Suffering Begin by Cole Germain Buckley, and About the Music by Gillian B. Anderson.
Yes. Delightful.
So this one is a little bit more of our more researched episodes. So.
It is. But honestly, you don't need to research it to enjoy the film.
No.
But it does add this film was definitely meant to make people want to research a little bit. It is very much like, it reminds me of the bad era of Discovery Channel documentaries where like what was real, what was fake was blurred, and Discovery Channel was like, oh, people will research because this is cool, and then no one did.
Yeah.
This is like that, but 1920s times.
Yeah, which is quite accurate.
Yeah.
So before getting into any of the backstory, we do have to take into account that this era, documentary film wasn't really a thing.
Styled film wasn't a thing. There was just film.
Yeah, genres really weren't fully developed, like novels or anything else by that, other pieces of literature.
Yeah.
The closest we had before Häxan was Nicho of the North, which was released the same year and just a little bit earlier, which, to take note, we do have, before this, we did have film actualités, natural films. They were a major part of the early eras of film, but while they documented life, it was more of a stretch to call them documentaries by today's terms because there wasn't really like a narrative. There wasn't really anything to tie everything together. It was just literally shots of birds or people dancing or trains.
And none of it was like educational. It was more like time capsule-y.
Yeah.
Where like the goal wasn't to educate the viewing audience. It was, hey, I as the camera owner are going to record this.
Yes. Also, while documentaries were newly forming, as noted by Fujiwara, so were the other genres, such as horror.
Yeah.
As we know.
Yeah, no, it wasn't necessarily a thing. Like, sure, book-wise, we had our genres fairly well sorted. But movie-wise, we kind of just saw the medium as, like, a new version of plays.
Yes.
And so, like, everything was just a play. So that kind of helps explain some of the goofiness that nowadays this movie kind of brings about, even though it's trying to be very serious.
Yeah. As well, Häxan plays out kind of, and same with Nicho of the North. By today's standards, they'd be more classified as a docudrama. Yeah,
there's definitely a lot more nuance now as far as like where to put movies, and the general audience and watchers of movies, even if they are not like fans of a super subculture or category system, if you say something to them, they'll be like, oh, okay, so I know that this is more nuanced than just a straight up documentary. That's right, Charlie, because this was both an attempt at entertainment while simultaneously attempted being a educational piece, but also almost a research study piece. So like this is so fractured, but it does come together well. It does work, but like even by today's standards, like I don't think very many would try to combine all of the elements like Häxan did.
No. And what's interesting about Häxan, and I don't know anything about Nicho of the North. I just know its place in history,
Yes.
but Christensen spent 2 years researching, and he provided a big bibliography with his work as well.
Yeah, he very much took this like a research project.
Mm-hmm.
He did a lot of his works like that, apparently. I haven't seen a lot of them. Some
Well,
of them hard to get a hold of,
Yeah, or lost.
unfortunately.
And so to that point, Christensen had wanted historians involved, but the Danish scholars he was in talks with were uninterested in the film. Remember, this is 1920s. Most people saw film as kind of like a passing trend. So
Yes.
this led him to do his own research, which has some flaws, but
It is interesting.
what was available in the 1920s, it's good for what they have.
Yeah, and even though, especially now, we can look back and say, like, we can clearly see what points he got right and which points he was making junctions to.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter. I'm sure to him it would have. He was definitely going for a very, like, logical string of conclusions with this.
Mm-hmm.
But by today's standards, it's just an interesting point of view.
Yeah.
And it almost turns it out from this documentary style like it was originally intended and puts it back into the horror category, which helps a lot, because honestly, I think that's part of the reason why it's made it so long.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even before researching, Christensen was influenced by specifically the prison administrator and reformer, Thomas Mott Osborne, who sought to treat prisoners as people and not as outcasts.
What a revolution.
This will be a precursor to what we see later on in parts of Häxan.
Yes.
Of which, if I remember right, I didn't write this down, unfortunately, 100%, so take it with a grain of salt. But Christensen had actually met Osborne at Sing Sing, where he was screening his 1916 film Blind Justice.
Oh.
And I think he saw someone got stabbed while it was going on. And
again, 1920 times were weird, and it does seem like a lot of people were stabbed much more frequently than I would like to think.
People still get stabbed a lot more frequently.
I know, but like, it just feels like people were getting stabbed a lot, especially at theaters.
And so, like we mentioned, Häxan is structured a bit differently. There's 7 chapters, and so that's how we're going to break down the review a bit.
Yes.
Some of the background on Häxan and witches in the film.
Yes.
Häxan began its production when Svensk Film Industry took Christensen on in 1919. This was also during the golden age of Swedish cinema that lasted between 1917 and 1924. Another film of note that has similar spooky vibes and has very good effects for the time was 1921's Phantom Carriage, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Häxan was filmed in Denmark between 1921 and 1922, but it was not the first film to depict witches.
Oh, no.
There are some shorts that were pointed out by Buckley, including 1980's The Witch, 1913 The Witch of Salem, and 1909 Hansel and Gretel, and 1916's Macbeth. As well, I did find a 1906 film by George Méliès, the person who did Journey to the Moon, A Trip to the Moon, which we talked about in a very, very early episode of the podcast. But he did a movie called The Witch.
Honestly, it has always been a super popular category for not just movies, but everything.
Yeah.
Plays, musicals, books, you name it, witches been in it.
Yes, but even by 1920, witches had not, even though they weren't a new element, they had not been explored as like a historical context.
No, this was all now we have a lot of research into like the history of dragons, the history of fairies and fairy tales, the history of witches, both from a realistic standpoint and also the folklore standpoint. That wasn't a thing. Those lines were all over the place and blurred back in the day, partially because it was a lot harder to do research.
Yeah, also the late the late 1800s kind of screwed up a lot of the research.
Yeah, that did throw a wrench into a lot of things.
Yeah. So did the Victorian era.
I have a lot of feelings about the Victorian era. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the concept of fuck around, find out real well. However, you can't just make fucking stuff up, which is exactly what the Victorians did. Yep. And unfortunately, we are still having to unravel all of the nonsense that they wrote down as facts.
Yeah, I recently learned that kilts in like the family pattern. Most likely that came from, there might have been some correlation, but there was In the Victorian era is when they really went hard of like, this plaid is from this family.
Yeah, the Victorian era made that shit up.
Yeah, so
At least to the extent that we know it today.
Yeah, so I think when I get my kilt, I'm just gonna choose whatever pattern I like the best.
You know what? I think as someone living in the Midwest, you should do just that.
Well, I don't know where the wedding is happening. I can't say too much.
I understand.
Yeah.
Don't say too much. If it was me and my fuckery, I would immediately find out what the color and theme of the wedding is and pick something very different.
Mm-hmm.
Just because.
Yeah.
I also don't get to go to a lot of weddings, though, as you can tell.
I'm wearing whatever kilt I feel like. I can't wear the kilt to my brother's wedding. That's
understandable.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah. But, anywho, before we dive into Häxan, what are we drinking today, Chris?
Well, for an autumny drink, we needed to have an autumn movie.
Mm-hmm.
We have an autumny drink. And Witch's Brew, the one from the movie, looked disgusting. So we are not drinking live toads and snakes, and instead apple cider.
Yes. Prost.
Prost.
Salut. Actually.
Delicious.
I always say I'll look up what the salute in the different countries are, and I never do.
Yes, same.
I should just find a list of it. I have it saved somewhere. But, Häxan. We open up on the title card in saying the film that it was made between 1919 and 1921. And we get the title card, Häxan, the Witch, a movie picture in 7 parts.
The 7 parts was part of what made this new to me.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen movies done in parts. Part of it was because we only had so much room on a reel.
Yeah.
And you also didn't expect people to sit for very long back in the day. You kind of expected, like, episodes now.
No, by this point we were having more, longer movies, and they were actually, like, people were going to see hour-and-a-half movies.
Oh, sure.
Or hour and a half, or whatever.
But not of documentaries.
No.
Especially one that was meant to be taken very seriously and, like, from a research standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a thesis project.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate heavily that he chose to put this into 7 parts, not only from, like, a research perspective, which makes sense. You have to break it up into, sections and nuggets for better digestion. But also, like, it almost creates, like, points for the movie watcher to be able to either have it all come out separately, which I imagine is how most people originally watched it, or nowadays pause it and be able to reflect back on the absolute shit show you just watched.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably my 3rd or 4th watching of Häxan, so.
And honestly, yeah, I watched it several times back to back. Mostly because the first time I watched it, you have to kind of watch it a couple times to even catch all of it. It's nice, like, it's much more visually open than a lot of 1920 films were, which is really nice, especially for one that's meant to be dark and spooky. Visually, it's pretty good. Most scenes you can actually see what's happening. There's not a lot of, like, missing dark footage.
Yeah, and it's not like different from the others where good chunks of it were destroyed, and so we had to, like, put stills up of what we even had left.
Yeah, it visually looks pretty good. There's just a lot going on all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so our first actual bit of, like, film we see is a close-up of the director, which, before we really get into it, I do want to bring up the music.
Ah, yes. I'm glad you do.
Just from the start, because the beginning of the movie, it's definitely old in the over-dramatic style.
It is very dramatic.
But the music fits so well with everything that's going on.
It is great.
And some important notes on that, the original music order was lost, but we have the list of songs they used. Mm-hmm. So the one we have, in the viewing of the Häxan that we were watching from the Criterion Collection, is based on the cue list from the Danish premiere of November 7th, 1922. Yes. So we're celebrating this movie a little bit ahead of time, but it's almost 100 years old. And Christensen wanted the movie to be silent, but he would go on later in the October 8th, 1922 issue of Film Journalen to praise the conductor Rudolf Sahlberg's arrangement, which I think is interesting because as far as we know, almost all movies at that time were still accompanied by some type of music. So it's it's interesting to see that Christensen wanted to make it absolutely silent.
honestly, despite making something that ended up being a horror icon, he really tried to go dry.
Mm-hmm.
He really did attempt to be, like, almost borderline boring.
Yeah.
He failed massively. It's incredibly entertaining. But also, something interesting to note is, yes, the Criterion version we have thankfully has what we think is the correct order of the score and all the original music. However, that's kind of a newer find. For a long time, we didn't really know what the music was meant to be, and so a lot of places would just put on music to go with it. So if you want, the film is free, of course, it's well old enough.
Oh, yeah.
And you can watch it in a plethora of places, all of which with different musical scores. I have watched it with a variety of music, and all of them, none of them match quite like the original scoring does. The original one, wonderful and great. But yeah, you can listen to it with Flight of the Bumblebees playing too, if that would,
that
delight
sounds
you.
awful, actually.
It was a little distracting, but one of the things that I was looking into, because I was like, there's no way this is the correct music. And I ran into like, oh no, it is definitely not. But it was interesting because a lot of people were saying like, oh, I haven't seen the Criterion one in the comments, and I've just always assumed that it played the either stereotypical like old-timey like piano music, because that's what a lot of the videos ended up with, or those who had seen it like in university talked about how their professor had just kind of put on the music that they liked to go with it.
Well, I think that continues a tradition that we'll get to at the end, because that falls into like some of the stuff that happened with the release of this movie.
Yes.
So we immediately get into part one, the historic understanding of the witch, which is a brief explanation of ideas and demons or beings brought through sickness, or the origins assuming to be stemmed from Persia.
Again, the research isn't holistic, but it is interesting where he managed to go.
Yeah, so in the history of witchcraft, there's a section that equates, or we're pretty sure our modern understanding of demons and everything did come from Persia, but there's a lot of similarities between African witchcraft and European witchcraft.
Sure.
In some regards, they're not the same at all, but there's elements that that carry across. So witches are such an old concept that they've been around for so long. Same with demons and everything else.
It is at this point almost impossible to truly decipher where like our concept comes from, because it's been brought out by a lot of stuff. But in the 1920 times, there was always like kind of a point that they were looking for. They were always looking for the source of the thing.
Yeah.
And it was not really like... I don't want to say it was frowned upon, but it was always kind of like the goal of your research project to find like the singular point.
Yeah.
Or the couple of points. And so that's very much what the movie and the research behind the movie is trying to do, is like, see here, if you put your finger right here, you can see very clearly that the witches are from... fill in random place.
Yeah, exactly. And in this segment, we also get an explanation of the Egyptian understanding of the universe, complete with model and all, which is...
it actually looks really good.
Yeah, these are very nice cross-sections and very well done sets.
I do appreciate that it is with such authority that he goes through the different, like, structures of how 1920s Europeans thought the history of people understanding the world worked.
Yeah.
Which we know now is skewed and wrong. But it doesn't matter, because it's very fascinating the way that, like, he, like, breaks through all of the different, like, back in these times we thought that we were the center.
Yeah.
And the columns held up the earth.
Yeah, that's at that part, because we do have another one that he does have better explanation of.
Yes, he does evolve, because clearly this project went on a while. But yeah, and like the models are really good.
Yeah, but of the parts of this movie, this is the most textbook-like portion.
Especially by today's standards.
Yes, I mean there's whole moments where there's a hand with a pointer stick pointing to the various elements that they're trying to explain.
And it's like, Professor so-and-so is now going to point to the thing I want him to point to.
Exactly.
It is very cute.
Which Christensen wanted to present his findings as a cultural history lecture in moving pictures, as he put it. Like,
which, I mean, for not having any like studies to work
Mhm.
with, no like examples, no PowerPoints of previous works to like base your stuff off of.
Yeah.
Honestly, not the worst. The
No.
pointing's awkward, but I mean, he at least got everything still in shot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the maps are totally readable. The pointing is clear. Yeah, I mean, maybe not how I would have done it artistically today, but he definitely took his time to do it well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So this movie ended up being very expensive.
Yes.
Even by 20 standards.
Yeah, well, I can imagine.
Actually, we have to specify by 1920 standards because we are technically in the 20s again.
We are. The last set of 20s.
The most current 20. Well, it might be the last set. Who knows?
We'll see. But yeah, so there's of course the research portion of this to account for. And, you know, that definitely takes up a good portion of this. He did a lot of research for this movie.
Yeah.
But boy howdy, the sets, props, and costuming for this, he just went all in.
Oh yeah.
Like no like because we've gone over George Méliès.
Yeah.
And while he is one of my favorite directors from the time period, you can very much see that he was mostly in it for fun and to try some new fun tricks. Because costumes are mostly like a bedsheet wrapped around someone.
Yeah.
Props are clearly made out of like a fish tank and some pipe cleaner. Not this movie.
No. Well, and you also have to remember Méliès was was a magician before, and so that's what he was doing, was carrying over his theatrics into making his movies, whereas this is a completely different endeavor.
Oh, for sure. But also there's just a level of detail that a lot of older movies from this time don't really bother to try and achieve. They either thought you wouldn't be able to see it, or it was more of a like for fun project.
Yeah.
Even the more serious ones generally were like looking at a train or looking at pedestrians, and they weren't going to cut out any of it. So like if someone stopped and stared at the camera for an awkward amount of time, they just left it.
Yeah.
This, however, was a very like detailed oriented crafted project.
Yes. And I think we see it even more so. As cool as the Egyptian understanding of the world is, the next two parts are probably the cooler parts.
Oh, yeah.
Because we jump very quickly from ancient times to medieval.
He spends a lot of effort on the medieval witch.
Yes. And we jump into the 7 series. I mean, that's the focus of this movie.
It is. And also, like, for the time period, that would have been the most ancient part that he could, like, reliably research.
Yeah. And so this diagram of the universe and God kind of makes me think of like the architecture diagrams we did in school to show like the advancement or thought process of, well, why did you remove that section and whatnot?
Very much so.
Yeah. And we also get to it's 10 spheres. In the 10th sphere, there's God and angels and hell at Earth's core.
You know, as we all learned in science.
Yeah. And from here, we also go to a series of woodblock prints. I always forget because, like, you look it up and everything looks out of place. Well, linear perspective was not invented until 1415, so...
Yeah, makes sense.
The mathematical portion of it. So we've tried perspective for a long time, but didn't do it very well.
Yeah, whoops.
Which we have depictions of burnings, the setting up of what makes a witch. One of my favorite depictions in it is a witch milking an axe handle.
Just like you do.
Yeah. And we get an explanation of the witch councils, the protection symbols underneath the imageries and whatnot, just trying to explain, hey, this isn't an evil symbol. This was actually for protection and whatnot.
Yeah, you don't want those witches touching your cattle. Yeah. It'd be terrible. Also,
the idea that witches cause sickness and went naked at night, applied ointments and salves, the desecration of the cross, banquet of corpses from the gallows, kissing the devil's ass, and flying home at the first crow of the cock.
There was a lot of pieces all kind of shoved in there for like what makes a witch.
Yeah.
And honestly, most of the focus of this film very which is right on point for the 1920s in general, was not like, witches, magic, evil. More of, witches do not worship Jesus, thus evil.
Yeah, it's just, it's...
There's a very broad understanding of, like, what qualifies everything.
And some of that has led into modern day, too.
Yes, of course.
And we also get a really, really cool shot of what hell's supposed to look like.
Yeah, very.
A moving figure and everything. That was expensive.
Very.
Yeah. Also, all this type of imagery is pulled from the Malleus Maleficarum, which I will get into in just a minute here. Because after all this relatively quick explanation...
Yeah, they do fly through it.
We cut to part 2, which is setting up the journey of an imaginary story of a witch from 1488.
It is, however, portrayed like this is, like, fact.
Yeah. Like I said, it sits more in the terms of, like, a docudrama or, like, a biopic.
Yes.
And to put a little historical context to the Malleus Maleficarum, this is the book that set the precedent for finding witches and providing witchcraft and also proving witchcraft, and had only been published for about 2 years at this point, when our little made-up story happens.
Yes.
Which we'll get into it a little bit more in part 3 on specifically what it was targeting. But I just wanted to set the historic precedent for that from the get-go.
Yes, yes.
Also, at this point, we're only about 38 years into an over 200-year witch craze.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time being obsessed with the fact that we could pinpoint all of the problems on someone.
Yeah. Also to note, we are only about 100 years out of the peak of the Black Death.
You know, that did cause a lot of trauma.
And also, historically, the craze also coincided in an era in Europe that was called the Little Ice Age that had peaks of cold weather that struck Europe, which really screwed over Europe for a long time.
Yeah, they have a surprisingly delicate balance that is needed for their crops.
Wheat's not a good crop.
It's really not.
Yeah.
But they relied on it incredibly so.
Yeah. And this pre-craze, the first Little Ice Age started in 1315. That led to the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, where it just non-stop rained for months on end. And, like, people
ruined it.
Yeah, people forget that, like, if you're constantly exposed to the cold and rain, like, regardless, like, there was nothing really dry, people died quickly.
And then on top of that, people needed something to blame.
Yes.
This wasn't an age of just, like, well, we could still say that we're still in the age of, like, just letting these sorts of things happen and accept that they do. People needed some root, some cause that they could control.
Yes. And then again, we had another mini ice age from 1560 to 1630.
Problematic.
Yes. And so, this story of our make-believe witch is an old lady just hiding in the basement or some sub-basement of some building, brewing her potions away in the middle of the night. This
set for this old lady witch is fantastic.
It is.
They really, this was very pre our standard stereotypical witch ideas. So we've gone more for the hag aesthetic. I love it. Yep. My favorite kind of witch, really. Well, and we have leaned hard into, like, the concept of, like frogs, snakes, lizards' eyes, bubbling cauldron, dead things everywhere, and, like, very ugly and mushy.
And also we have the lovely skeletons just magically being held together.
I do like the random dog ? Skeleton hanging from her ceiling.
Yeah. It might be a cat. No, it's not a cat.
It's a little hard to tell exactly what it is. Maybe fox?
Something.
It's a small skeleton.
Yeah. And also we get to see her helper stealing a hangman's fingers.
I do like that she then shoves the finger into a barrel and, like, shoves it in with a stick like a crazy person.
Yeah. And it's great. And, like, they're even talking about, like, well, it's in the other thing. So at the time, it was also popular to, especially with thieves, to steal their hands and cut off their fingers.
Yes, you can.
From the gallows, because that was, like, the last bit of luck that they would have.
Yes. There was a very blurry line between the superstitions of the time
Mm-hmm.
and witchcraft.
And not just that, but also like folk magic.
Yes. And so we were reaching a time when folk magic, the lines of like what's good luck, what's bad luck,
Mm-hmm.
which was everything. Everything had a meaning in some regard. And then like being a vilified witch in league with the devil, that was the slope, right? Like that was where this fictional character is taking place. But because we are focused in on the idea and dialogue from a research standpoint for this movie, that like, witches back then thought of as devils, we're not going to go ahead and show the like nuances. We're going to go right into witch, dead people, fingers. You all know this. Make the connections yourself.
Yeah, which, I mean, we get the snake and toad concoction that they're making on top of everything else, constantly trying to put the toad and snake back in the basket.
I do appreciate that it was clearly a real snake and real toad, and like no animals were harmed in the making of this film sort of situation.
Yeah.
And so like clearly the snake and toad are meant to be like in the cauldron pot,
Mm-hmm.
but the cauldron is on an actual fire.
Yeah.
So they just do close-ups of like the snake and toad trying to escape.
Yeah. And I mean, it's good. It's good for what it has. I mean,
yeah.
Even the costuming is really good.
Honestly, like the characters in this look spot on.
Mm-hmm.
Very very convincing for what they were trying to do.
Yeah. And also, something of note that I didn't do a whole lot of digging into. I just ran out of time. I guess women back in the day used to be like the brewmasters of everything.
I mean, they were the ones staying home, and that takes time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
if you're already in charge of the hearth, you might as well put stuff over the hearth.
Mm-hmm. Also, the other thing that I really like about this whole movie is just the tinting of everything.
Oh yeah.
Where they use like a warm washing or a warm gel for the interiors, and then at blue, obviously, it's going to be night.
Yes.
But no one can smell the shit that she's making.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Also, where's the smoke going?
Nowhere.
Exactly.
Just like straight into the floorboards of the room above. I also like how there's a scene very shortly after her trying to re-corral the toad and frog back into the basket that a random stranger just like walks by what appears to be like the window to the basement and is just banging on it, being like, open up, and like people are just walking by.
Yeah.
Like there's no privacy in this medieval town. How have people missed the witch?
Well, I mean, it's just setting up of like the old times of what witches were previously.
Yes, and I also think that part of the entire lens of this movie was partially to, and it's just a bias of the research of the time, and it's something that we've been trying to like unlearn. But there was this idea that like the Middle Ages were full of silly people with silly ideas who did not know better.
Victorians.
Yes. They were the perpetrators, I think, of this idea. And so, like, despite the fact that he's trying very hard to make this a very serious and, like, realistic interpretation of what he thinks is probably an accurate representation of a medieval witch, it is all skewed through the lens of, like, wow, medieval people were dumb.
Well...
But, like, that's part of the fun of it nowadays.
Yeah. Well, and and we see more of it, especially with the next segment.
Oh,
where,
my God, yes.
So the person banging on the window, I think she does come down to...
Yeah,
actually, she's there to buy.
Yeah, not sneaky at all.
Where she's offered a brew of cat feces and dove hearts to win over a pious man. And we get probably one of my favorite characters in this movie, the Tubby Friar.
Yes, I have questions on this woman's choice in man.
It's
partially because he doesn't... he's a friar.
Yeah.
That seems a little off limits, not gonna lie.
He's also definitely living in gluttony.
He is clearly not the model church citizen of the time.
I mean, even her daydreaming is him eating something.
Yeah, no, he spends all his time eating.
Yeah. And yeah, it's kind of cute just to see like what she thinks these potions will end up doing, because she's also offered a potion of a young playful male sparrow, which this whole segment just makes me think of like, I think you introduced me to this stupid shit of like manifest it.
Yes.
And, like, hopeful wishing. If I do X plus Y, I'll get Z.
If you put it out there, it will come. Yes, and that's still
Field of Dreams.
Yes, very much so. And this is an interesting, like, intersection that we can see that even back in the day, witchcraft, like, knew, they just didn't realize they knew, is, like, if you put the hope out there, like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, is as those motivational speakers say, right?
Yeah. As said by Wayne Gretzky, said by Michael Scott.
Exactly. And so, like, yes, there is something to that, but, like, all of it was disguised under this, like, magic potion shit. But one of the things that I found interesting was most of the magic potions that we do get, like, ingredients for from this movie, a lot of them tie all the way back to Pliny the Elder, who was maybe not the most reliable source of information, but kind of goes to prove that, like, this idea of, like, oh, use a random ass thing here for other thing has been around forever.
Didn't Pliny also, like, recommend a diet of, like, pure cabbage or some shit?
I have no doubt. The man was full of all sorts of shit.
I need to go back through some of Max Miller's cooking history stuff.
He does a wonderful job of explaining a lot of Pliny the Elder's questionable recipes, as does, just reading through them in general, because there's a lot of very interesting concoctions for various illnesses. And, all sorts of things for all sorts of problems. Yeah. Most of them sound terrible.
Well...
Like cat poop. And pigeon hearts.
Yeah. Grody. Well, the woman's also offered an ointment that will bring the friar to her, which... Here's the thing. This witch is just a good saleswoman.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%.
That's all she is doing, is just in sales trying to manipulate this woman. Like, I can offer you this, but... if you really, really want him to bone you, here's this ointment.
Yeah, it's kind of like the car salesman who's like, your car looks okay, but if you really want, we could up the blinker fluid.
Yeah. And so we also get another little segment. At night, 2 medical students smuggle, or what we assume are medical students. They could just be random hooligans.
Honestly, not described at all.
Smuggling in a body to examine, which they pray before opening the corpse. And also to note, in the medieval ages, witches were also men. There wasn't like the distinction between witches and warlocks. Anyone could be a witch.
Yes, which was just the practice.
Yeah.
Something that we are kind of running back towards. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
But I also like that the medieval... something that he touches on in this movie, and this is the part where he goes onto it, is the medieval witch was also the one who knew practical healing.
Yes.
And, like, health benefits, like, sore throat, mint and lemon, sort of thing.
Exactly.
And these two guys are going to be accused of witchcraft because they are curious as to how the body works, and that, of course, is a sin.
Yes.
And sin equals witchcraft.
I can't remember if this is the era where forks were still blasphemy. I'm pretty sure it is.
We had a lot of trouble with blasphemy. And at some point, I feel like everything has been blasphemy.
Yeah, for those who don't know, forks used to be blasphemous unless it was for, like, serving purposes, because the only utensils you normally had were knives and spoons.
Yes.
Because... why use a utensil when God gave you hands?
Yeah. It was also a lot of, like, hey, fuck you, French people, but, like...
I feel that is, like, all of European history is just, fuck you, French people.
Well, and then it became popular, and then it was more of, like, hey, fuck you, peasants. We have forks and you don't. And then the peasants got forks, and they're like, aha, fuck you, peasants, we don't eat with forks. That's for stupid people. And then, you started dying because people didn't wash their hands, and, yeah.
We've gotten better.
I hope.
Kind of.
In bit by bit.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
But the devil's work is everywhere.
Always.
We have another segment portraying a homeless woman on a stoop being picked on by a couple men, and she curses them.
I do like her curse. It is the most childlike curse one can imagine.
I should have pulled out my Irish curse book.
Those are very interesting and entertaining. This one, I think she curses one man to not be able to close his mouth.
Yeah.
And he's just stuck there with his mouth wide open.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it's all that thing of, if you believe it enough, And that's the thing of magic, is if you believe it enough, it becomes reality, and you see the devil everywhere.
Of course.
Which, yeah, it is a good concept. I mean, it's kind of the...
Yes.
Be careful what you believe.
I like that all of the supposed witchcraft that he chose to portray in this movie is all witchcraft that is clearly not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cursing someone to leave their mouth open forever, flying, making a random man fall in love with you with cat poop.
I'm sure there is someone out there who's into that.
I hope not. I know. You
don't want to believe it's real.
Yes, I have been raised on the internet. I know the rules of the internet. I know that it's a thing because we have thought of it, and thus it's already out there. But I would like to live without that knowledge.
Yeah, same.
I'm just not going to Google it.
I don't want to do it either. But we also have this in the manifestation of the Fat Friar, when one of my favorite bits.
Oh, yes.
The devil appearing before him.
Yes.
Very sensually and very aggressively.
It's very aggressive.
So this part's actually in a music video by Night Versus.
Yes. Yes.
Phoenix Levitation, I think, is what it is. But yeah, this part's in it, and it's just great. It's
the devil in this, played by the director himself.
Yes.
But with like a full suit on.
Yes.
He got the long, spindly, the Grinch-like fingers. He's got horns. He's got the pointy ears.
He's very
body
furry.
Paint. Yeah, he's added chest hair to himself.
He makes me think of like how Henry Zebrowski describes himself.
Which isn't accurate, but like the mental image of the like description from Henry Zebrowski. Yes.
Yes.
Like, and because he's got like a bodysuit on, right? Because we see a lot in this movie. We don't see that much. But also, we have to add devilness to him. So he's extra round, extra plump. And the devil in this is like the live action Grinch level aggressive.
Yes.
In his actions.
Well, and because here's the thing, so we're also seeing like his works where like there's a woman who obviously is a little hot and bothered for the time.
Yes.
And her husband's asleep, so the devil comes and
knocks on, and he doesn't just, he knocks on her window the first time, and then he's like, beating on the window.
And then it opens up and he's like, hello?
Yes.
Horny woman in here?
Oh my gosh, it's so bad.
Oh, it's great though. But it's also a way of explaining like human desires of things that were undesirable in a person.
Well, and then this was also an attempt at, a lot of it was an attempt at explaining things that they didn't understand. Like, why would this woman, who is happily married to the man who is fast asleep, not want her husband and want something, who would long for something else?
How dare she? But
instead of asking said lady, hey, are you happy with your husband? Because if she said no, she would die.
Yeah.
They just assumed that was because the devil was a sexy devil.
We've seen a lot of stuff where the devil's a sexy devil.
This is not the best example of sexy devil unless you find, the Grinch real hot.
I don't know, I dig him. He'd be a fun dude to hang out with.
A fun dude to hang out with, maybe a one-night stand, but like, this devil is aggressive.
Oh, he's very aggressive, in a fun way.
Yes, he is by far the most interesting thing to watch in this film.
Yeah, because after this, we're explained that the devil's companions are generally the old and the miserly.
Which makes sense because they were typically the outcast.
Yeah, which shows the ageism of the time.
Oh there's a lot of ageism and ableism in this film.
Yeah.
Also, surprising amount of white people.
Well, it's Europe. It
is in the 1920s, but like we are very focused on like this is coming from a very specific point of view, and that's okay. Yeah. But like at the time, this was meant to be an unbiased research project.
Well, it's set in 1488 Europe, undescribed European town, and I will say it is set in continental Europe, not England, which had its own thing going on.
Oh boy, did they ever!
Yes.
I also very much like how, even from his own research standpoint, it is very clear that, like, everything was from his perspective.
Yeah.
We had not yet developed the, like, peer review article studies of like, oh, detach yourself from your work. This was very much a I feel sort of research time period.
Well,
and like he does a good job of not making it like I have discovered, but like it's how it was.
I'll argue against that up until the last section of the movie.
That was my catcher point.
Because he really did his research, and he was in talks with other scholars at the time, so it wasn't really that the fact that he was only doing this himself.
No.
But it is, I will agree, it is a very narrow-minded viewpoint, because yes, it is a certain group of scholars who had access, generally white men or the church people.
Exactly. And like, he very much definitely did his best, and especially towards the end when he explains like, oh, I have found a real life source, a real woman. We'll get to the real woman. But like, it is very interesting that like this is a movie very focused on like the poor, the impoverished, and the like lesser down in society, but it's all from a very like interesting perspective.
Well, because
he didn't intend it. It's just how it is.
Okay, so here's the thing. So as he explains, it was driven by a drunken fear of the pyre.
Oh yes.
But here's the thing. So in the modern history of witchcraft, they do go through and explain that like a lot of the accusations were for the common people. It didn't get up till the higher ups or the richer or the wealthy until the end. It was a lot of infighting between the peasantry.
Oh yeah, no, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Who's gonna have troubles to be sad about?
Yeah.
Not the rich.
So it is a specific focus on a group because that was the group of the time who was having to deal with it. This is, again, we're 38 years into the issues.
Yes, and he has clearly done his best to research what those people looked like and where they lived and all that sort of thing. Because like for the most part, it looks really good.
Yeah,
we just dramatize the ever-loving hell out of these people, and I kind of love it.
I dig it too. My favorite part of this entire segment is the devil aggressively churning the butter.
Yes,
just sitting there like beating it like he's beating his dick.
It is such a straightforward, clear metaphor that, like, it is almost impossible to look the devil in the eyes while this scene is going on.
Because he's also got his tongue out waggling it.
Okay, that was part of the interesting part, because he took so much imagery from the Catholic Church ideas of devils and demons. And especially the medieval devils and demons, which we've all seen The Prince, we've all seen Monty Python's, like, visuals.
Heavily Hieronymus Bosch.
Yes. So there's a lot...
Dope shit.
Yeah, there's a lot of just, like, what the literal fuck is going on here. But part of that was this symbol, like, this version of the devil with his forked, pointed tongue being out. That was part of the symbology, and he tries really hard to like recognize that across and not just be like, look, I am pretending to be like, he's trying very hard, but because of that, the devil spends 90% of his screen time with his tongue just full on out, just like lizard style pointing at things. It
makes me want to go to a Ren fair and use a pickup line, hey baby, you want to churn my butter?
Yeah, this is very much that sort of time thing, yeah. It's reminiscent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also all just to show ways of selling your soul for various earthly desires.
And he does a good job of, like, trying to tie it back to the modern person. Imagine if this was you now, is some of the cards that roll up.
Yes, giving coins out to an old woman who... she can't pick them up quick enough, and they're all pulling away, drawing her away, which also nice X-frame chairs in this set.
Yes.
Which they carry her away to a door that a devil's tearing through. It's rough stop animation, but it's still good.
Yeah, the idea is definitely getting across, which is honestly a lot better than a lot of 19 others.
Yep, and she's carried off, or she follows off into a sabbat.
Yeah.
And falls into the traps of witchcraft. Which, we do have to admit some of the devil costumes are a little rough.
Yeah,
But they're still pretty good, though.
They're better than a lot of stuff for the time.
Yes.
I'll give them that. And then the other thing that I like is, while this is all very from a certain lens, like we've discussed, he does have a very sympathetic, like, base point for all of the witches. Like, he very much feels like, oh, this isn't their fault. They've fallen into witchcraft. It has been bestowed upon them, as opposed to, like, these horrible people chose this.
Yeah, it's very much the, it kind of falls under, I'm going to reference Marcus Parks on this again.
Uh-huh.
It falls under like the mental health thing of it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility kind of issue.
It is. But as we'll talk about towards the end here, their idea of like responsibility, very different than nowadays.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And so from here we go into part 3, the accusations.
Which is maybe one of my favorite parts of this.
Yes. And this section is based off a few writings, mainly the Malleus Maleficarum, also known as, and it has a dope name, the Hammer of the Witches.
Which honestly could be a metal band.
Yes, I think it is a metal band.
It probably is a metal band.
Rights and Rights of Germans Past,
Mm-hmm.
and a History of Customs. I have not read any of these. I've known about the Malleus Maleficarum, and I do plan to get it at some point. But I do want to spend a brief moment to talk about the Malleus Maleficarum,
Uh-huh.
as this was the primary book that was used to prosecute witches.
I have read excerpts because I have gone to many a museum, but I have not read the whole thing.
Yeah. So, the Malleus Maleficarum was a book written by a Dominican punk.
Dominican punk? Wow, they had those back then?
I mean,
Maybe.
their version of a punk.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. A Dominican monk, and he was also an inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer. And he was backed by a papal bull, by Pope Innocent VIII, which, for those not in the Catholic religion, papal bull is a type of public decree named after and sealed, decree that was, it was named after the seal that appeared at the end of the document.
Yes.
And it was the Pope's bull.
It is the Pope's word.
Yes.
It is as good as him saying it himself.
Yeah, basically, this witch craze had the popes, the big head of almost all of religion at this point. It had his stamp of approval.
Yes, which was important because, again, back in the time, no one had, like, the ability to text the Pope.
No. But pre-Malleus Maleficarum, witches could be both male and female, but upon its printing, it went through lengths to try and explain that women were more likely to be witches due to as the new history of witchcraft puts it, weaker, more stupid, superstitious, and sensational.
Part of that was because all of this is coming from the old Catholic understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and the old Catholic understanding was women were the root of all evil.
Yes.
Eve was the one who fucked everything up. If it wasn't for her, Adam would have been fine. So that's kind of the thought process that went into, sure, men can be witches, but, like, let's be real, it's probably the ladies.
Men are more steadfast. They're not worried about
Women
anything.
are so flippant and emotional. They'll just fall over for anything.
How dare you have emotions, Chris?
I know. I'm so sorry. I shall rein those right back in.
But this is also where you have, as noted in Chapter 1, another important note and reminder that this is also a focus on mainland witch trials, and the Malleus Maleficarum, while having 14 editions by 1520, did not have an English translation until more recent times.
You know, a common problem during the witch era.
Yes, which I will save the differences between the witchcraft trials of mainland Europe and England Europe for next week's episode.
Yes, very good.
Which, yes, you guys are getting 3 Halloween episodes this year.
Because it is our favorite time of year.
Yes. And of note, while being sexist, the Malleus Maleficarum was, of course, also anti-Semitic, which so shocking.
Yeah, we say anti-Semitic, and it definitely was. Do not get me wrong there. Very much was. But it was mostly like, hey, unless you are a white Roman Catholic man doing your very best to be in the church, you are not good enough.
Yeah.
How dare you breathe? So, like, if they knew other people existed, they would have hated them too.
Yeah.
They just focused on the groups they currently knew about.
Well, it's also just a trend in a pattern in history where when bad stuff happens for a very long time, and even still,
oh yeah,
the Jewish people are always blamed for it for some reason.
That happens a lot.
Yeah,
yeah.
There's a reason why this movie holds up for what it does.
Yes, that is very true.
Yeah. Which we have a woodblock depiction of a woman being pushed down into water, which I've heard it's a mixture of different things about this. This is our standard typical float, sink, or
if she's a witch, she floats, much like churches and small rocks.
Yeah. And if she if she thinks she was innocent. But here the thing was that it wasn't 100% that they just threw and damned if you do, damned if you don't. So it all depended on who was carrying it out. Some people were very pushy about it and just wanted to kill this person.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas other times they weren't trying to kill them. It was just their way of testing it. And they were supposed to try and get them back out of the water if possible.
Yeah, and the written down goal in a lot of the older texts that I can find was like, oh, we weren't trying to kill them. We wanted a confession to bring them back to the faith, is what they said. Somehow a lot of people died doing that, but
I mean, that kind of happens when your head's ducked underwater for an extended period of time.
The other thing to note is swimming wasn't super popular back in this time period. First off, clothing was heavy as hell.
Yeah.
And you weren't naked very often. Like, ever. Preferably.
Yeah.
And especially ladies' clothing would have been near impossible to swim in for very long periods of time. If you could swim at all. So, like, the other thought was like, hey, there is a chance that fewer of them were hogtied, and if you had been taught to swim by the devil, then that's where all of this is coming from.
Yeah.
But also, like, a good way to make sure the lady that you really want dead doesn't swim is if you tie her feet together. Yeah. It's a lot harder to swim that way.
Yeah. It's just old-timey stuff that...
Yeah.
Because we do get into a little bit more of that, because on our next little vignette, we have a woman whose husband died prematurely, unexpected, and so...
He's a printer? They make him sound like he's really important in the town, so I'm assuming they mean like he's the only guy who runs the printing press.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
But she also goes to someone who uses lead scrying to tell who the bewitched victim is. Yes,
which, scrying. You point at a thing and you call it scrying.
It's also a different type of, I guess, pseudoscience instead of like witchcraft.
Yes, which... depending on who's doing the pseudoscience, makes it okay or not.
Yeah, exactly. Which the victim ends up find fault in an old woman who comes begging for food.
Rude, but okay.
Grody teeth close up.
Okay, I love this old woman because she was clearly given... Like, they put her in the rattiest, nasty clothes they could, but they also found a woman that, like, they could point at off the streets and be like, you are a early 1800s beggar woman. Because she looks the part real well. And then on top of that, they are like, okay, we're going to sit you down in the kitchen, and you are just going to go full hog ham on this bowl of slop.
Yep.
And so she's just shoveling it away, like a rabid raccoon. She can clearly hear... everyone in this kitchen / dining room coming and going. There's like 8 people who like peek their head in the door and they're like, a rabid person? What? And they like walk in on her and she's just eating. She does not care.
This is how I imagine you eating peas.
I wish I had this dedication.
But it's also just finding fault in like the little superstitions.
Superstition was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, this woman is a scary face.
Yeah.
Like, they successfully found an actor to play the scary person.
Yeah, because she tests it by, like, blessing it or something?
Yeah, and the lady's like, stop doing that.
Yeah, give me my food.
Yeah, but that comes across, if you're looking for the sign, as like, she doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm. And we also have the finding fault in the needy and... the lesser of society.
And then my favorite line from this is, and by line I mean like on the written placard, it has the dialogue and stuff, is this woman has evil eyes.
Yeah.
And I think it's supposed to be kind of like interpreted like, oh, she has shifty eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, like, she's not the greatest looking lady. And like, we are a beggar who is eating like a rabid raccoon out of this woman's kitchen. So like, I can understand the confusion.
Yeah.
Maybe not a good reason to murder somebody, but...
I mean, there are serial killers who have killed for less.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
There are just drunken people who have killed for less.
Yes. And from this vignette, we have another one that comes up of, I think it's their daughter or housemaid.
There's a lot of random-ass people in this house.
Yeah.
I only know who 2 of them are, and one of them's the dead one.
Yeah, and we get a little counter to the first idea that, as I think it said in chapter 2, that the devil's companions were the old and the miserly.
Yes.
We have a woman who runs into a young monk who is obviously sexually repressing his feelings.
This poor child.
Yeah.
/ teenager / young adult man is having the hardest time ever.
Yeah, which, yeah, it's just...
It puts a lot of blame in places it doesn't need to be, but, like, it is an interesting, like, attempt at being like, no, not all witches are old and gross. Some of them are beautiful young women.
So here's the thing. The movie tells this portion of the story tells the perspective as from the idea that women are the source of evil.
Of course.
But it's also putting the blame on the church itself.
Yes. And we are given, like, a solid 4 group of men of the church to, like, have as the bad guys for this vignette, which I kind of like, because it does have, like, it does add a level of, like, aha, if only this person had done this. Like, because he is trying so hard to bring witchcraft into the quote-unquote modern era, it does help a lot to be able for the modern audience to, like, make those connections much more easily.
Yes. Yeah, and so this is... It all just stems down to suppression of human desires.
I also like very much that this woman comes into the churchyard looking for help. She's got tears running down her face. She's having a hard time. Someone help her. And she comes to the first person she sees, who is a monk, and she lightly touches his arm and is like, help me. And the placard says, the monk is not allowed to talk to women. And so he just kind of, like, stands there awkwardly and is like, no. And then a different monk is like, ma'am, you can't touch him. Come over here. I will help you. And so she runs over and crying, oh, help me. And this young...
Hysterics.
Yes. As we later learn, it is, of course, the great hysterics. But I like how the light touch on the arm, this poor young monk, then just spirals into what we can only describe as the devil's hold.
Yeah.
He just, like, whirl tails right down into hell itself. Because a woman cried to him and asked for help and lightly touched his arm.
I mean...
I feel like if that's what it takes to turn you into a terrible person, maybe you need to like, go somewhere else. Try, like, farther into the monastery. Behind a closed locked door.
Yeah, that would work. And so this concludes section 3, and we cut to part 4, the tortures and the inquisitions, which...
A fascinating portion.
Because, by the way, let's remind that they actually catch the witch by literally throwing a bag over her. And
no, like my favorite musical, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the way they kidnap those women, exactly the same way they kidnap the witches in this movie.
Yep.
They literally walk in, look at this old woman who's shoveling mush into her mouth with her hands still, walk over, and she's like, hi, I'm eating here. And they're like, yep, in a bag. And, like, pick her up and walk out. Like, no one fights back.
It's a great moment.
I think one of the, like, maids walks in and is like, oh gosh, what are y'all doing? And they put her in a bag. I'm not sure why.
No, that's later down the line.
Okay.
Because she's the one who touches the young monk.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, we capture witches by putting them in bags.
Yeah. And that happens in, I think, this next portion or the portion after. But, next portion. We get an inquisition on the suspected witch. We get the stocks. Also a reminder, at this time, prisoners were required to pay for everything.
Yeah, no, you didn't get free food. You didn't get free boarding.
Mm-hmm. Which, also, on top of that, they were tortured with the words of Jesus on consecrated paper and whey. The chamber of torture is really cool in this shot.
Yeah, they do a good job.
It uses silhouettes of the devices to imply what would happen instead of what actually happens, because we never actually fully see everything that happens.
But they do a great job of, like, bringing on the impression of, like, torture and, like, all of these horrible acts. Because, like, you really believe on the screen, you're like, wow, this poor lady's been here for ages.
Yep.
Like, they do a great job of convincing you for an old-timey movie.
Oh, yeah. And even, like, once she's still not confessing and they decide to torture her further, they pull her into the dark part of the set, and we only see the silhouettes. One thing of note that was brought up in the commentary, that the film shares similarities to German Expressionism.
Of course.
Though it uses shadows, it is not like that genre itself, because in German Expressionism, the shadows are generally painted on the set themselves and not projected.
Yes, but I see where they're trying to go with the whole, like, leaving a lot to the imagination.
Yes.
Having these big dramatic changes in style where it's like, oh, we can see very clearly to shadows.
Yep. And the whole thing is just to portray that at this time, you were guilty until proven innocent.
And to be proven innocent, you couldn't just, like, openly confess. They had to extract the confession from you.
Yes.
Because otherwise it wasn't real.
Which gets into the tricky part, because she ends up confessing what they want to hear.
Oh boy, she just tells them everything.
Yeah, which the witch's flying is technically impressive over the model town, especially compared to, like, watching another movie, the 1906 The Witch.
Oh yeah, honestly, it looks pretty good.
Yeah. And the Sabbath scene is fun and grotesque.
Yes, I like.
Demon's a little on the rough side still.
Honestly, though, not the worst.
No.
Like, yeah, the bodysuit's a little silly, but, like, the pig one looks good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the pig one's really good. And also, I know it's campy, but I kind of like the skeletal horse.
I do too.
Where they've only got, like, the neck and the head, and then they just cover everything else.
With a cloth, yeah.
Like,
I don't know, he kind of reminds me of, like, Night on Bald Mountain, sort of goofy.
Yeah, a bit.
Halloween-y.
Yeah. And we also see that at these Sabbats, the punishment of witches who are not evil enough.
I do like that they are just, like, judging how evil they are. Because, like, up until this point, the witches don't really do anything evil. They just boil toads sometimes.
Well...
And then, like, eat peas with their hands.
This is the part where it's gonna get evil. Is,
yes, we're getting there.
This is where we have the children sacrificing, which...
Yeah.
Isn't as grotesque as other movies, but it's still just, like... The devil's holding
baby doll.
Model. Yeah, baby doll.
Baby doll. Yeah. I mean, it's a good attempt at, like, oh no, the children. But, like, it's a baby doll covered in ketchup.
Yeah.
Sort of style.
Yeah.
But again, we do have the gross, very poofy devil holding the baby. So, like, there is some good imagery, and there's lots of good, like, stills from this section that, like, really do stick with you image-wise.
Yep. And they have their dinner of toads and unchristened children cooked by Karna.
Delightful. My favorite.
All before the orgies with more butter churning.
Yeah, there's a lot of butter churning. I kind of had hoped that we'd have more metaphors, because, like, the butter churning one's really on point. But no, we just get the one. My favorite is the movie is grotesque, especially for its time period. By not modern day standards, don't worry about it, you're fine. But by old timey standards, this is a lot.
Yeah. This
is a little pearl clutching at times. However, I like that there is a line in the sand that they will not cross. And that is kissing the devil's butt. Because in the original works, it is not just kissing the butt cheek of the devil.
It's kissing the asshole.
Yes, you know, right on, lip to lip.
The opposite lip.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, like, straight on. But that would be too far for this movie. And so they just let it go with, like, everyone gently pecking the butt.
Yep. Which, also, this version of the devil has some big ol' swinging titties.
Yeah. It really does.
We got some knee knockers on this one.
Oh, man. And a lot of butt.
Yes, there's a lot. For this movie, there's a fair amount of nudity.
Yes, which is part of the reason why I say, like, for old-timey times, this would have been pearl clutchy.
Yeah.
There's plenty of naked, and, like, there's a lot of naked ladies, which was a no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. How dare. And there's a lot of, like, implied problems.
Yeah.
And, like, not even, like, subtly, which would have been the preferred. Like, we are just straight up being like, yeah, no, just off screen, everyone's fucking.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it's the 20s. You can't exactly pull a Wicker Man and the cop leaves the hotel to see an orgy in the lawn.
That's true. You can't fully show it, but they get as close as they can for 1920 standards.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But this is the biggest issue with the era of witchcraft, because in accusations, if you went to a Sabbat, you had to have seen other people at that Sabbat, so who else was there with you?
Surely you recognized somebody.
And a lot of times it was family members.
Honestly, though, you were just trying to say someone you knew. Like,
yeah.
Because you couldn't make up a person. the town had like what 80 people total. Like you had to pick people that were real. You can't be like, oh, the stranger who walked through town the other day. It was him.
Well,
I mean, they try to do that, but like, if they're asking for more than 2 names, and you've got your thumb stuck in the thumb press clamp.
Yeah, these are people who don't really travel that far in their entire lifetime.
They probably don't travel, to be honest. Like, pilgrimages were the traveling of the time, and that was kind of a privilege.
Yeah, and normally done by holy men.
Yeah, especially for this time period that this is representing.
Yeah. And so from here, we cut to part 5 with the continuation of the cycles, which this is the part where the young lady gets captured.
This is my favorite part, because I still don't really understand who she is. I think she's the wife of the dead man.
I think so, or she's a close friend or something.
But it's hard to tell because there's like 3 or 4 women who are all dressed kind of similarly, and they all run around a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to lose track of who is who.
Oh, yeah.
Especially because, like, all of them seem very upset about the dead man. So, like, I don't know if these are daughters or family members or
her sister or something.
Yeah, like, I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah. Well,
but we are being captured.
Yeah, and I think it probably is the wife because she's the one who punished the older lady too.
Which would make the most sense.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's I think it's the maid or something.
It's hard to tell.
Because the wife is crying on the bed and she goes to check what's happening up front.
Ah, yes, that would make sense.
And also, she's the one who accused that person, or the old woman. So, they also bring up that if you oppose the capture of a witch, you also were a witch.
And you can't not be in cahoots for like, oh, you must witness, like, and like sign the death, pretty much, of these people. Otherwise, you are also part of this problem. Like, there is a no-win situation here, no matter where you're at.
And it brings up the double standards of it was bad to stand out whether you're young and pretty or old and ugly. Yeah,
which, hard to do when there's only 80 people in the town.
Yeah, it's also all just about finding a scapegoat because we also see, because this is the part where we don't really have like a torture scene, but we have like the tail end of someone not wanting to actually confess.
Yes.
Her hair has been cut.
She's having a rough time.
Yeah.
Looks terrible.
But one of the monks is trying to convince her to turn water into wine or something.
Do magic.
Or no, turn it to lead or some shit. So something to help benefit himself, which he then uses as a way to trick her and gaslight her into being, oh, you're a witch.
You said you would, aha.
Yeah, and then the other inquisitors come in and they're like, oh, yes, don't believe her tears. They use powders to do that.
That is something that, like, in my study of witchcraft, I had not run into the heavy amount that this research project, I will call it, implies in the powders and especially the ointment of witches. This movie implies that witches are just creamy all the time. Just lathered in Vaseline.
Can't catch me, Kappa!
You can't catch me if I'm slippery! But no, like, because, like I'd come across witch ointment, I'd come across witch powder, obviously. Like, that was all fairly standard stuff, but the amount that this movie goes to is, like, they're imagining, like, baby powder in the hair because you were in high school and you didn't have any dry shampoo level powder.
What?
This might be a girl hack.
Yes, please explain to me and the other male listeners.
Okay, so nowadays it is very easy to get dry shampoo, right? Okay. You just walk into Walmart, it's there. But back in the day, back in the 90s, it was a little harder to get. Wasn't as popular a product. And so we came up with our own home remedies, one of which was baby powder. Because in the 90s, everyone had baby powder in their homes. Don't know why. We didn't have children that had reason to have baby powder. We just had baby powder in the house, which is very absorbent, mostly because it's mostly cornstarch. And so the idea was you put a little bit in your roots because your hair was greasy before you go to school, because you didn't have time to shower. So you put your hair in a bun, you pat a little powder on it. Now you don't look greasy. It just made you look like a powdered wig.
You know what I say to that?
What?
Burn the Chris! How dare she make home remedies? Burn her! She is a witch!
This is the same concept of why we all had baby oil in the house, too. Because it was like, it removed waterproof makeup.
Okay.
And so we were all just greasy all the fucking time. Also, this was the same time period where Vaseline was like the home cure for everything. You have a problem? Vaseline.
What?
Vaseline cured everything back in the day, my dude.
I know my mom used it on like cuts and scrapes, but that was about it.
It's really not meant for that.
Okay.
It's just like...
Or no, not Vaseline, Neosporin.
Yeah, see, your mom's a normal person.
Yeah,
Later on, I will help you research the many fake uses of Vaseline and why it now says do not eat on the side of the container.
Oh god. Doesn't lube the poop then.
That was a thought. That was a use for Vaseline. Look, okay, back in the day, us Midwestern folk, we were desperate and we were greasy.
All right. Burn the witch! She's desperate and greasy!
But that's what this feels like. This is what this feels like, is like these old-timey witches had invented lotion, were slathering themselves in lotion, and the church was like, how dare you not be crusty?
What is this? Lavender? How dare I smell pleasant?
But no, okay, that was part of it, because back then, like, we had beauty products, and, like, our bathing, quote-unquote, standards were different back then. But a lot of our hair products, a lot of our body, like, products, like, something like lotion, would have been made out of, like, rendered beef fat. Like, people didn't smell great, but there were ways around that, if you wanted to bother.
Yeah.
Like a witch.
Witch! But yeah, it's this part is really quick in regards to the other portions of the movie.
It is short.
But it's also to show that it points out that witchcraft shows up wherever the judges go.
No, that was something that I liked that he brought like a lot of attention to, was he's like, yes, you know, townsfolk were blaming each other, but they were blaming each other to this group who's coming and going from town. They are not like staying in town. These are not people that they know. This is like a traveling caravan of witch hunters.
Yeah, I think this is also the era of like the witch hunter general.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's like one guy roaming around be like, are there witches in this town? And people be like, I guess.
I'm pretty sure it's the dude who wrote the Hammer of the Witch.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense, really.
Some cool-ass names came from this era for horrible reasons.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like someone needed to keep a job and a reason to be paid still.
Yeah, and yeah, he sure tried.
Yeah. And here's one of the also inaccuracies of this movie.
Sure.
We have that it states that an estimated 8 million people were burned. This is noted by Tyberg as inaccuracy that was prominent at the time because it was believed as truth as it had been spread by an 18th century propagandist who took a specific time frame of executions when they were at their height and used that as a model to be applied across the craze. The actual estimates range from about 40 to 50,000 people, with the new history of witchcraft placing it on the high range of about 60,000, with 110,000 people tortured. A lot of people still.
Yes, still a lot of people. Not that many people, though.
Yeah.
Not the absolute shit ton extreme, just a shit ton.
Yep. And so with this next part, we do get back to a little bit more of the historical portions.
Yes, we're back to the researchy side.
Yeah, we're told that some of the confessions were partial and truthful. We have a reimagining of the first hovel and the use of superstition and ritual, which the hovel is much more brighter. It's not what is portrayed in the first act or second chapter. Yeah. We also get a display of the torture devices and applications. Probably one of the more powerful parts of the movie too, of just like, oh yeah, I would bend under that. Yeah,
this is by far the most like traditional by nowadays standards of like research documentary movie. Like, it's a very clear depiction of said torture devices with then a flashcard of explaining like how it was probably used, or a rendering of how it was used.
Realistically placed together by this designer, Lecablon.
Yeah, I don't know.
I butchered that 100%. But yeah, so like you were saying, the first one that shows is like a collar that was used for torture, and they're like, we're not going to demonstrate it, but here's what it would look like through this woodcut print. And then there was also, these are the thumb screws, and he's applying them to another woman, and he's like, you wouldn't believe the confessions I got out of her after just a minute in the thumb screws.
It does imply that he has some sense of humor for all of this, but, like, because this is written on a card and he's not, like, actually on screen for this, it's really hard to tell. Like, it's kind of like when you have that boss who, like, in emails you can't tell if they're being sarcastic or not.
Yeah.
It's got that vibe.
Yeah, just don't use sarcasm in emails.
Yeah, it's just best avoided.
Or put a winky face next to it so they know you're joking.
Or pick a really obviously sarcastic font.
Yeah.
Times New Roman.
We also cut way to the end of this era.
Oh yes, we just jump right on ahead.
Yeah, we have the devils infiltrating the coven, or a covent of nuns. Is that the right term?
A covent of nuns, yeah.
Covent of nuns. Okay. Which also, how dare the devil corrupt nuns, the most pure of women, that would not lead to the fetishization in the 60s and 70s with the nunsploitation movies.
Yeah, or the lingering imagery of nuns as silly people, as we see in many a movie. My favorite one, of course, being Monty Python.
Yeah, I think that stereotype continued into Monty Python.
Oh yeah, no, like, even the more, like, serious depictions of nuns, like, still manage to be goofy even by modern standards, like Sister Act.
I've never seen Sister Act.
Whoopi Goldberg at her finest.
And there's a lot of movies from
It's
the 90s.
a musical, you wouldn't like it. Let's be real here.
Is it?
It's very musical.
I don't know that.
It's okay. You wouldn't care for it, but I am sad that you haven't seen such a classic piece of our youth.
Yeah, at some point. But this spreading is very much so like the hysteria of the movie The Devil, which I need to see still, which is based on the Nuns of Loudun.
Yes, yeah.
And while this is not talked about in the film, it's also the tail end of the craze as the Nuns of Loudun, and a handful of other incidents that led to further skepticism, which, plus the Inquisitions coming for those in charge, led to changes. Notably, the last executions of witchcraft occurred in England in 1684, America in 1682, Scotland in 1727, France in 1745, Germany 1775, with the full collapse happening somewhere between 1650 and 1750, where a lot of the accusations were kind of like, yeah, no, you're lying.
Yeah, those numbers are too close to current day for my comfort.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
I'll get into that a little bit at the end, because that leads to where we're at with a lot of modern stuff.
Yes.
But this was also due to philosophical and religious revisions.
Of course, as it always is.
Yep. And now we cut to part 7.
The final bit.
Where Christensen, he almost cut out this part, but he found it fit still later on in his lifetime, which I agree, it's the weakest part of the movie.
It is, but it's the most interesting part.
And it's an important part to actually tie it up into modern times. Otherwise, it's just a study of, oh, here's witchcrafts, instead of linking it to modern times. It's like, yeah, this shit repeats itself, guys.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. It is definitely the weakest, and it is the most flawed by modern eyes. But it is also the most interesting.
Yes, because it starts off with a close-up of many older people and a couple young people who would have been killed. I think they were reprising the roles from earlier on in the movie, too.
Yes, I believe so. So people with some form of physical abnormality, like a hunched back, crooked spines, goofy jaws.
Or just old as shit.
Old as shit, missing an eyeball.
Yeah.
You know, things that you can't help.
Yep, and this is where we get the comparing of mental disorders to the craze, which...
We should start by saying the 1920 times did not fully understand mental problems or disorders, and had a very bad habit of categorizing things under really big umbrella terms.
My favorite meme. Oh, you have ghosts in your blood. You should do cocaine about that.
You know what, though? I know it's a meme. It's not wrong.
No, that's all Freud, though. Freud was so into cocaine.
Well, there's a lot of things Freud was into.
His mom.
And maybe his dad. Questions. Freud had a lot of problems that he really should have seen an actual therapist for, but he didn't. He saw himself. part of the problem.
I mean, at the time, there wasn't really anyone else you could go to. It was like him and Jung.
That's true. And both of them had their own problems. But on top of not really understanding it, there was a desire, though, to help fix it. However, with that said, there was two very different styles of fixing. There was one for the poor and one for the rich.
Lobotomy.
Yeah, the poor one involved a lot of things that we would now think of as, like, prison. And for the richer folk, much more hotel spa sort of treatment.
Yeah.
None of which was very good.
I'm wrong. We are not to lobotomies yet. That wasn't until the 40s or 50s.
I was going to say, that would have been an impressive procedure for the time.
Or sorry, that's when it increased dramatically. 41. So we're still not to lobotomies yet, but
no.
Still.
Like, we do know that something needs to be done, but all we know how to do is dunk people in water and give them cocaine. So that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah. Well, and I like what Fujiwara wrote, is that his goal was to throw light on the psychological causes of these witch trials by demonstrating their connections with certain abnormalities to the human psyche, abnormalities that have existed throughout history and still exist in our midst.
And he's not wrong. And I think that's part of the reason why this movie's managed to maintain its like place in history as long as it has, to the extent it has.
Yes.
Because it's not just spooky imagery, like, he's not wrong. There is probably links there. He just didn't have the knowledge we have now.
Yes, which I do also think it's important to note that even during the craze, there was counter-arguments. There were people who opposed it.
Sure.
But as the accusations started increasing, they kind of hushed up a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to oppose something when that would probably mean that you're also a witch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the last, like, argument against it was in, like, the mid-1700s, and even then they were like, why are you writing this? We were already like, yeah, no, this isn't real.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we also get scientific explanations of the Devil's Mark, which, Tyberg compares early psychology experiments to the Inquisitions.
He's not wrong.
No. I mean, we're still very early in the days of understanding the brain.
And also, like, proper patient treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And medicine in general.
Yeah, and this is very much the old versus new and shows how this movie is dated quite a bit.
But at the time, they would have thought this was very modern, which is part of what makes this interesting.
And why it connects hysteria to the sexist ideals of the early 1920s psychological movement.
An umbrella term for pretty much anything that could possibly be wrong. Like, one of the examples...
Possibly wrong with a woman.
Yes.
Specifically women.
Always with women. And one of the examples he gives is a woman who goes out and has kleptomania. Or as we would now probably understand it, she has some sort of anxiety, probably a little bit of PTSD, since she talks about how the war has affected her and the death of her husband, and it seems like she's handling that with kleptomania.
Because doesn't he call her a poor little hysterical witch?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
And instead of treating it like we would treat nowadays, she is shown some kindness because, again, he is trying to be good and, like, coming from a like, caring place for these people. But, like, they didn't have the knowledge to be like, yes, this woman has a lot of things happening to her right now. Here's how we could help. Instead, it's just like, hysteria. It has affected this poor woman and driven her to steal.
I'll let you go, but you must promise never to come in this store again.
Which, I mean, like, from the store sales clerk, I understand. This is not your job to, be someone's doctor. But, like, this whole movie is, like, trying to make these connections. He does a good job, but, like, they just didn't know what was wrong.
No, not
like, at all.
And, I mean, like you said, it was people broken by the war, but I also... The actual conclusion of this movie is a little...
It's a little silly.
It is a little silly, because he starts by off saying that the Almighty no longer sits in the 10th sphere. Shows images of, like, women flying planes and stuff, and it's like...
Yeah, it does imply a little bit that he thinks the world is going to hell because women do things.
No, I don't think he's implying that at all. He's just showing, like, hey, we've advanced. Women can do stuff that men are doing.
Yes. We don't get quite as far as being like, we are past the silliness.
No.
But he's definitely trying.
Yeah, he's saying that people still suffer, and we have modern solutions for modern problems, which is the part of the woman getting into a shower at a mental health club.
Yeah, which, again, this would have been the treatment for the rich woman, not the other ones.
Exactly.
And her main complaint is that the shower is cold, and they are explaining that, that helps.
Yeah, which, again, probably repressing of feelings and whatnot. But what I do like about the actual end of the movie is that it closes on the consequences of how far we've advanced. And in that time frame, from the late 1700s to 1920, they advanced quite a bit because it contrasts the showering to a witch burning.
Yes. Like, it, despite being old and despite being flawed, it does really good job for being a, research presentation.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I mean, that's how it ends with the closing card of Slut.
The end.
I think that's how you say it. I haven't looked it up, but...
I believe so.
It's spelled slut. And I always find it funny.
Ends with slut.
Ends with slut. But yeah, Häxan. It was actually pretty popular upon release in Denmark and Sweden, although the Swedish censors discouraged the close-ups as they deemed them indecent and unnatural.
Again, I can understand the old-timey questioning about how much boob is in this movie and butt.
Well, they weren't too concerned about that. That part of the world was only concerned about that. Fun fact that I didn't know, and I still need to see this movie, but the close-ups later influenced The Passion of the Joan of Arc, which came out in 1928. I still need to see it.
I understand that not everyone lives in the old-timey times, but I do enjoy that one.
It's part of Criterion. It's been on my potential list for a while.
It is also free on YouTube if you so choose.
I will stick with the Criterion version. You
honestly,
peasant.
Honestly, probably a good choice, as the quality is probably better.
Always. It's like Night of the Living Dead, where what was it? I picked I have 5 or 6 different copies of Night of the Living Dead.
It makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
It does, because I loaded up one before I got the Criterion one. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this movie in forever. It's on this list of 50 movies I bought. Loaded it up, and it was so bad.
It's so grainy you can't even get through it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, this one, especially the Criterion version, looks spectacular.
Yes.
Worth the extra money.
But Häxan was heavily censored in Germany and France due to the torture, sex, nudity, and the anti-clericism.
Yeah, there's a lot of the church didn't help messaging throughout the movie.
Yeah, Germany in general thought it was too educational and meaningless.
But also remember, this is the time when, they were kind of hoping that, movies and film would, promote them.
Yeah.
That was kind of their main goal. So I can see how this wouldn't help the imagery.
No, not at all. Also, France disliked the anti-clerical nature of it.
Which, makes sense. They were very much into the church thing at the time.
Thought it was a defamation of the church, although the Parisian surrealists loved the film, because of course they did.
That does not surprise me. They were into a lot of things.
Yep. And this movie was actually one of the movies that was fully banned in the U.S. until 1930s, where it emerged as an art film.
Which, honestly, kind of surprising, but I can see it.
Yeah. It would be later shortened to Häxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages in 1968 by Anthony Bouch, who, with narration by William S. Burroughs, and it's accompanied by a jazz score by Daniel Humar.
I like jazz. I like the original score a little bit better. The jazz is just a little bit off for me.
Yeah, I think, what was it? I think Marcus Parks in No Dogs in Space said jazz is playing it's missing all the notes you're supposed to play.
Yes, which sometimes I want and need. Not for this movie, though.
No. But Häxan created the essay film.
It really did.
Christensen tried to be as accurate to the source material as he could. As with any movies, you still have to try and be entertaining.
He succeeded on being the entertaining part. I'll give him that.
And this was because he wanted to bring knowledge to the masses, which also led to the use of a pseudo-documentary or the docudrama being more acceptable to Häxan, in my opinion.
I would agree.
Yeah, just think biopics that are bend the truth for the entertainment.
And honestly, he really didn't bend too far from what he understood to be the, facts that he'd found.
Yeah, which...
He mostly just added a lot of imagery that wasn't originally there.
Yeah,
And like made up some characters. And like
Yeah.
made some characters up.
Yeah. No surprise. Science nerds like this movie.
Of course they do.
And while we touched on the music at the beginning, Christensen was asked later in his career if he would have remade the film with sound, to which he said that it would destroy the imagination and the fantasy of the silent films, which I completely agree with, because he brings up like, well, what does the devil sound like?
Yes. And like, I understand where he's coming from. And for me, like, that's just how I appreciate all silent films.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a level of charm to them being fully silent and just having the music, or in some cases, no music at all.
Yeah.
But I can also understand how, especially something like this movie, like Häxan, yeah, I could understand wanting some sound effects at least.
Yeah. And part of the reason Häxan stands out, I think it's how it was when Tyberg mentioned that at the time, the freedom that was given to Christensen by the production company, the Svensk film industry,
mm-hmm.
it gave him the ability to make a homogenous film that could all be done by himself, and it could be a Christensen film, like how a Tarantino film is a Tarantino film.
Yes, it has a very signature thumbprint.
Yeah, and I think this is something that really, like, it makes Häxan stand out as a piece of cinema instead of just a documentary film.
Very much so. Similar to how, like, how you were saying, like, other directors, especially now, have, like, their signature look, their signature style. There wasn't a whole lot of signature looks and styles back then because we hadn't really developed them.
Nope.
But he did manage to create a certain type of imagery, a certain type of way of going through the screen as far as like when certain things were going to happen, how you were going to see certain objects and things, especially for like the devil scenes.
Yep.
Those really stand out, and they still stand out.
Oh yeah, no, I mean there's a reason I still watch this movie every couple of years.
Yeah, definitely.
Also of note and consequence to the director, this freedom led Häxan to be the most expensive film in Scandinavia, or in all the Scandinavian countries during the silent era. This was also partially due to filming primarily at night under harder than normal conditions, which Christensen did this because he wanted to feel like it was in the moment of when this stuff would happen, make it feel like it was witchcraft.
And honestly, I think he succeeded. The acting in this is some of the best for the time period, especially if you compare it to other like big works of the time, and even like the horror works like Nosferatu, which
Nosferatu?
Yeah, I can't
Nosferatu.
Sure, I can't say it correctly. But like even that one, which I mean, arguably a better known classic, honestly the acting for that one feels more rough and less fluid. This one feels like very convincing.
Yeah, there was production put into it.
Yes.
But because of this, no one wanted to work with Christensen due to the controversy and the expense. Also, at the time, I guess there was an influx of Hollywood film into foreign countries at the time.
Makes sense.
And unfortunately, it killed the 2 sequels Christensen planned, as well as which would have been called The Saints and the Spirits, with The Saints would have been a study on the religious hysteria. And as the Spirit would have planned to bring together the best mediums and study their phenomena. Because this was at the time where...
Oh, spiritualism was at its height.
Yeah, and Christensen believed that there was still some truth to the witch craze and witchcraft.
Oh, sure. I mean, not only was it popular during the time, but, like, it was just kind of a standard baseline belief that, like, yeah, we don't understand it all.
Exactly. And, I mean, while Häxan may be deep, I do have some criticisms of my own.
Of course.
Partially, and this carries on to just my criticism of any documentary in general. I think it didn't help that I also watched, I finished Showa.
Oh, yeah.
Around that time, which I have the same kind of complaints about Showa as well. It's good, but there's still issues. Because with Häxan, the focus is heavily on the trials and does a great job dramatizing them, but like a lot of documentaries, it still misses a lot of points, and especially the late eras of the trial. Like there's that big focus on the big parts of the witch trials, but nothing towards the tail end.
Sure. Which
I think maybe he might have ended up covering in the later movies.
Honestly, would have made sense with the saints and the like church hysteria.
Exactly. Which I don't know if it was a lack of resources or access to documents at the time, but just kind of also skips the early stages as well, because there was a build-up. There was like
Oh, yeah.
100 or two or 300 years of build-up up to the witch craze.
Yeah, it didn't just appear.
Yeah. And, I mean, to that being said, 200 years of information, 200 plus years of information is hard to cover and dramatize in under 2 hours.
Especially for a silent film.
Exactly. And on top of that, the romantic revival of witchcraft in the 19th century as a nature religion and its criticism in the late 19th century that continued interest would ultimately lead to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the rise of Aleister Crowley, modern-day Satanism, It goes on and on. There's a lot of...
The cycle continues.
Exactly. And that's something that we could easily plug into another later set movie.
For sure.
Yeah. But for what it encapsulates, I think Häxan is a solid introductory film to the subject.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And, I don't know, I think part of what makes Häxan still hold up is that, we've talked about this a handful of times, is that the patterns present in the movie still apply to modern society, albeit with different paints or different labels.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. And I think part of the reason why not only does, like, the concepts continue on, but because he spent so much time and effort on the imagery, it gives something for a modern viewer to actually like enjoy watching. Mm-hmm. Because honestly, yeah, silent films aren't for everyone, and they can be hard to get through. This one's not one of them because there's so much effort and emphasis put into a lot of details. Mm-hmm. And that makes it so much more entertaining than just a straight like intro to witches.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I like you said, there's a richness to the film. The sets are well done.
The lighting is actually well done for once.
It's not like parts of Die Nibelungen that feels just sparse for what they had.
Yeah, and at no point does it feel like a set or a stage like more Hollywood-style films of the time did. Yeah. Like, this very much felt like he tried to encapsulate the world, which makes it a very, like, unique piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely stands the test of time.
Yes, an impressive amount of time.
Oh, 100 years.
Yes.
Which, I mean, that's part of the reason I want to cover it is because, one, it's a good movie, and it's 100 years old, and it still holds up.
Oh, yeah, and also, like...
And it feels complete. It doesn't feel like there's parts missing or like it was rushed.
And, like, despite we've talked a lot about how, like, by now standards, we would probably put this in some form of documentary like category, it holds up as far as like having horror elements.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not scary by modern day standards by any stretch of the means, but like the imagery, the costumes, the stories being told, they hold up as far as like good spooky stories.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good movie all around.
It really is, yeah.
So, I guess at the end of it all, Chris, on the good, bad, weird scale, what do you recommend this movie?
Oh, this is a good. And I highly recommend that you watch it. Yes, I understand. Silent films are not for everyone. However, this is one of the few ones that I really do think you should give a go. Yes. It will change how you like think of silent films and how they look and how they can be seen.
Yeah, this probably is one of the silent films that I would recommend to anyone. I give it a good with a slight twinge of old-timey weird.
Yeah, I understand.
But I can't fully put it into weird because it doesn't cross that threshold of just being odd.
No, it tries too hard to be good to truly be weird.
Exactly. And so, would you recommend this movie?
Oh my gosh, yes. I am glad that we watched it for the podcast because honestly I had kind of forgotten that it existed.
I stopped talking about it for a bit.
Understandable. And also like I've said lots of times, old-timey things are not for everyone. They are sometimes an acquired taste, and sometimes you never acquire the taste for them. But Häxan's one of the few ones that I would argue fits so nicely with modern viewing styles that, like, you will maybe not love it, you maybe not want to watch it every year, but, like, you will get something out of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if you haven't watched it in a while, definitely give it a rewatch. I mean...
Yeah, and I will also say, I know it's expensive, but the Criterion version of this really is a great way to watch it if you have the ability. It really does sharpen up the imagery, the music timing is much better, and you also aren't going to have random music put in.
No. And, I mean, hell, as a companion piece, also pick up The Phantom Carriage.
Yeah.
They are two good old horror films.
They really do. And the book that comes with it for the Criterion Collection is really insightful and full, like to the brim, of really interesting information.
Yes, no, definitely. So, yeah, definitely check out Häxan, a movie through the ages, I guess.
I would say so.
Yeah, so, but anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.